dynamic query, like let's go to developer console first. Let me log in, or I will open even here Salesforce Inspector. So if I open here the Salesforce Inspector, all right, I want to export data. If I say I want to select name, first name, or yeah, first name, last name from contact. This query is not dynamic, right? It has like, I want to get the first name and the last name from the contact, and there is nothing that is like depending on the user input or what you will tell me. Also, if I do that, if I go and open this one and I get the query here and I say where ID, well, this value here, I got the first name and the last name of the contact that match this ID. So again, it's static, it's hard-coded ID, it's not dynamic. So when I take this to developer console and execute anonymous for Apex, if I open here contact object, and I do like that, and I would print system.debug, check contact, and I will print the contact object here. When I do that and I try to run it, again, it's static. We hard-coded the ID, right? And we print it. So that should be simple, straightforward. But is it a good practice in Salesforce that you hard-code an ID here in Apex, within the Apex?
No, it is not.
It's not. So that's where the idea of the dynamic query come. We don't want to be hard coding the where clause or like the ID here, that we want to get a specific ID and that's it. Because what if I am using this query I call it from an LWC, that the user choose a contact or write the ID manually, and I have to take it and search with it, or type a first name and I want to find the user, for example, where first name equal, for example, Sally. Here it's hard coded, but again, I can have a UI where the user will type, for example, Sally or Adam, and you want to take the input from the user and search what. So this is where the idea of dynamic come. We want not to hard code values or to hard code data. And we want our queries to be written in a way without any hard code and to accept input dynamically. So this input can come from a flow, can come from an LWC, can come from another method. It depends on how you want to call this query or where it's called from. So let's read it together. So dynamic SOQL allows you to build and execute queries at runtime using strings in Apex. So that's what we are saying. Now, what we have here is hard-coded and it's not dynamic. So we want to replace this with a dynamic so it can execute at runtime. If I send it Sally versus another time Adam versus another time Ahmed. So every time I send the name, we want to capture it and run the query with this name that we are passing. And we can do as well, to make it more clear for you, I can create here a class and I will say here contact utility, for example. And I want to write here a method that is public static and it will return a contact. And I will say get contact by ID, for example. But now, if I take this here and I return this contact. This is my method. I did a utility method that I will call it to return a contact for me. So if I do, instead of this here, I can call my contact utility and I will say get contact by ID. When I do it, it will always get me the contact of like John O'Brien, because this is the contact that we pass or hard-coded the ID in the contact here utility. And this is not what we want to do. What we want to do is we want to make it dynamic. We wanted to that it accept a string. And I want to once call it with the ID, this one, and another time call it with another ID. So to be dynamic. So what we would do in that case, I can take this contact ID and instead of this hard-coded text, let me comment it here. I will do like that. And instead of the ID that we have, we use colon, the 2 dots, and the contact ID. So that means if I pass here this ID, and let me try to call it with another one. So if I go get another contact, Jack Russell, I pass here the ID. It's another ID. Once, when I will call it the first time, it will go get the contact with this ID and print. It will return this contact and will print it. The second time, it will get Jack Russell and it will print it. So let's see it together. Method does nothing correct signature. Line 1. Get contact by ID string. Isn't here get contact by ID? And it takes a string. I didn't save it, sorry. It wasn't saved. So it was not expecting a parameter. Now I saved it, it should run with no issues. So now when I run it, the first time it got me John, the second time Jack Russell, because the ID became dynamic. So it's not hard-coded anymore. It's decided at the runtime based on the ID that I'm passing. So if I have to run this 10 times, each time with a different ID, we'll get different 10 contacts here. So it depends on the contact that you are passing, and you are passing it on the fly. The dynamic query, we can do it the way I did here. And there is another thing that you can build your string concatenated and use database.query. So either or. We just need to make sure always that whenever we have the dynamic query and we build our string, that it's safe and we don't have any like SOQL injection. That's something that we need to be careful with it. So that's what the main purpose of the dynamic SOQL. So the dynamic SOQL helps you to run and execute queries at runtime. As you saw here, the contact ID, instead of being hard-coded, we passed it once with an ID, another time with another ID. We don't know ahead of time who is consuming the method or who is calling it with which ID. So it's decided at runtime which contact to return. So when to use it, we don't use dynamic queries if we don't need it. We mainly use it when we don't know, like you are expected to get or collect some data from user and they will enter it, and based on it, you will get a query. That means you need dynamic query. But let's say you want to query something or a certain record that you know for sure this is what you want, or a certain criteria. I want to get the accounts that got created today. There is nothing here that requires dynamic query because I know the criteria. I want to get the accounts that got created today. So I'm using the created date and the created date to be today. So I don't care about dynamic. So in that case, there is no need to use dynamic queries because there is no use case for it. And the benefit of it, they give you flexibility because you won't go and create one query for the first ID, another query for the second ID, and repeat your method or your queries over and over again. It's dynamic. It's one query, but it's dynamic based on the ID you are calling and passing. It will do it the way or return the records that you want. That's the dynamic query idea.
All
The
right.
thing that I was telling you about is the SOQL injection. You have to be careful with it, especially if you're
Okay.
using Database.query. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it
Thanks for
clear
yeah.
or
Thank you
when?
for the session. Yeah,
Sorry?
it's very clear. Thank you.
You're on.
Yes, it's clear. Thank you very much. Oh,
Okay. Okay. Let me give here an example with the Database.query until Femi, you fix your audio. So the Database.query, let me put here an example. I think we went through it when we did explain the dynamic query in depth. Let me put it here in the execute anonymous and go through it. So here, we don't have a string where we build the query. We have the query. We just have the ID here, dynamic with a column, but we can build the query dynamically totally. Let's say you don't know which fields you want to get, not just the where clause. You may give the user the list of fields available on the object. They choose which ones they want to return, and you can build your query based on their choice. So in that case, you cannot even do this form. You would need to build your query string by string because they will select even like you can give them to select the fields, the object they want to query. So you can go like totally dynamic for them. So in that case, we form the query we have, the string, the way we need it with the fields we have and the where clause and everything based on, again, user input. The user input can control the fields, can control the object we are returning or the query, the where clause, it depends. Then we do database.query here. So the database.query is how you will run it. You cannot anymore like use the square brackets. So you do database.query and you pass the string, and that will return a list of S objects because it's dynamic. It doesn't know which object you are returning. And then you can work with the results either as a list of S object, or you can do a typecasting for it directly. Like, here it's a list of accounts. You could do the typecasting to list of accounts directly and work with it. So that's when you go for the database.query, and it gives you more like flexibility or like more dynamic. Even if you want to select which fields or build it totally, which fields, which object, and so on. But it's very important to be careful with the SOQL injection and how to get rid of that. So either like use static queries with binding variables, as we did here in this example. It's a part of it static with binding variables. It's still considered dynamic because we are not hard-coded, but this is totally 100% like you can be dynamic on the fields, the objects, everything. So that one as well, you need to be careful and use escape single quotes to avoid any SOQL injection. And the session where we explained the dynamic queries, we discussed like in depth examples of the SOQL injection and how the output can be different based on these SOQL injections and how the escape single quotes helped us solve it.